Today's shiur begins at the top of Daf Ches at the new Mishnah. You will notice a series of diamond markings, and on the side of the Gemara, we feature them under the Mivneh heading that we have written into our specially marked Shas Ozer Gemaras. It reads as follows: Hareini Nazir. That is the phrase that you'll see in the diamond as we go down through the Mishnah. Dugmois shoynais, different examples show kabolas nazirus, where a person accepts upon himself nazirus. The Mishnah begins: Hareini Nazir, Keseyar Roshi, Ka'afar Ha'aretz, Gechoil Hayam. Person says that he's going to be a Nazir like the hairs on his head, like the dirt of the ground, like the sand of the sea. Hareze Nazir Oilam Umegaleach Achas L'Shloishim Yoim. Any one of these phrases binds him to Nazirus permanently. However, he takes a haircut every 30 days. Rebbe Omer Ein Ze Megaleach Achas L'Shloishim Yom. Rebbe disagrees, and he says the above mentioned expressions will not entitle him to take a haircut once every 30 days. What would be an example of someone who would be able to take a haircut once every 30 days? Ha'omer harei olai nazirus keseyar roshi. Very, very fine difference in expression, but he says harei olai nazirus. He uses the word nazirus instead of saying hareini nazir. He says harei olai nazirus keseyar roshi u'ka'aforos gechol hayam. And according to Rebbe, by using this expression, you gain a sense of, we'll say, individuality or units of time, separate Nazirus periods that will, of course, extend forever. Before we go further in the Mishnah, we would like to look together at the Tosfos commentary, as is very common in this Masechta, in the Maseches Nazir, the way it's printed in the standard Shas editions that we use. Tosfos appear often out of place. Later in this Masechta, it's going to become a very serious problem. Mirz Hashem will deal with it then, just trying to locate the relevant Tosfos. And in this case, Tosfos that we're looking at begins at the lower part of Zayin Omid Beis, and we'd like to look at the Tosfos that you can see 4 lines from the end of the page. Zayin Omid Beis, Hareini Nazir Keseyar Roshi Ka'afar Ha'aretz Chayam Reize Nazir Lo'ilam U'Megalech Achas L'Shloishim Yom Pirush Nazirus Harbe Kibel Olav. This person, according to the Tanakama, has accepted upon himself multiple Nazirios. Ka'afar Ha'aretz U'Kechol Hayam, like the dirt of the ground, the sand of the sea. U'Megaleach B'Yoim Shloishim U'Mevi Korbanosov, and he'll take a haircut every 30 days, and upon the 30-day period reached, each 30 days he will also bring the Nazir sacrifices. The next Tosfos, Ein Ze Megaleach Achas L'Shloishim Yom Pirush, Rebbe Svirolei. Rebbe is of the opinion that if you were to use the opening expression of the Mishnah, Hareini Nazir Keseyar Roshi, the Nazirus Meruba Kabdolov Ad Yoy Moisai, one long Nazirus period until his death is what he accepted. Ad Shom Beferush Nazirus, unless he adds that word or uses that particular expression, Kidemasik, as it goes on to say in the Mishnah. Personally, I was thinking, but I'm not able to prove it. In fact, it's maybe an uncomfortable position to take, but reading the word Nazirus, one would almost want to read it as Naziros, in the plural form. Whether that's true or not, it's at least accurate to say that using the term Nazirus implies an individualized unit of Nazirus observance. In the commentaries that you find from they make Shas amendations, particularly the Nusus HaRivan that you find on the side of the Gemara. You'll find when he wants to make reference in an explicit fashion to multiple Nazirios, he uses the word Nazirios, with a yud added to the latter part of the word. And you can see this on here on Daf Ches, if you look in the Nuschas HaRivan, for example, Ois Daled, Ois Hey, you see from time to time the word spelled Nazirios when making reference to multiple Naziros. This way or that way, whichever way you look at things, according to Rebbe, using the word Nazirus, even if it's read with that particular vowelization, it nevertheless creates room for understanding multiple individual Nazirus periods. We continue now in the Mishnah. Hareini Nazir Maloi Habayas, or Malo Hakupa. One can find in Meforshim that there's another gears instead of Malo Habayas, Malo Chavis. And in fact, that might be a more pleasant version, because just like a kupa is a container, a box, a chavis is a barrel, also a container. But the girsa that appears in our text is Malo Habayas, a house full. So a person says, I'm a Nazir, a house full. Or I'm a Nazir full, a box full of Nazir. Both can also, we investigate, we ask him, Im Omar, Achas Gedoyla Nazarti. If, when asked, what do you mean when you say I want to be a house full of Nazir? If he says, well, I accepted on myself one large Nazirus, the result of that would be Nazir Shloshim Yom. He's to observe 30 days of Nazirus. The Imamar Stam Nazarti, he says, I accepted Nazirus in an unqualified fashion. I didn't have any specific intention. Then Royan es hakupa kiluhi malea chardol will view the kupa container, the box, as if it were filled with chardol. Chardol is sometimes translated as mustard seed. What it is, it's some type of plant whose seeds are very fine grain-like seeds, powdery type seeds. So, of course, using a magnifying glass or a microscope, you'll notice that they are actually individual units. So, a person who would have said, "I'm a Nazir Malo Kupa," and responded upon being asked, "What did you mean?" and he says, "Stam Nazarti," will view it as if he says, I'm a Nazir, like a barrel full, or like a box full of chardol seeds. And the result is, Nazir kol yomov. He will have to observe Nazirus the rest of his life. Let us look at the Tosfos commentary at the top of the page. Hareini Nazir malo habayas malo hakupa. Pirush. Bayas reikonis o kupa reikonis lefonov. We have a man standing in front of an empty house or an empty box, and he makes this comment. He says, I'm a Nazir Malo Habayas. A house, the house full, I am accepting Nazirus, or the box full of Nazirus. We ask him, we investigate, and if he responds to our question and says, well, Achas Gedol Nadarti, one long vow. Nazir Shloshim Yom. He will be a Nazir for one period of 30 days. Pirush Nazirus Achas Nadarti. All I accepted on myself was really one Nazirus. V'hadikamer Molei Abayas. That which he says, a houseful, Da'aricha Milsa. It's burdensome. It's like a long period for him. It's burdensome upon him. As we saw in our previous year, the similar idea. V'eino Nazir Elo Shloshim Yom. The net result, though, is one Nazirus of 30 days. The standard Nazirus period. V'yimamar Stam Nodarti. If he says, well, I stam without any qualification in mind, I simply vowed. Royan akupa kilu malea chardol. We view the box as if it's filled with chardol. V'nazir kol yomov. L'rabonon Diliel Nazirus Achar Nazirus. according to the Rabbanan that we saw in Daf Zayin, who argued with Rebbe, a person who would say, Hareini Nazir Malo Hakupa, he would have to observe Nazirus for the rest of his life in 30-day segments. But each 30 days, take a haircut and bring the sacrifices. That would be according to the Rabbanan. According to Rebbe, if a person would have said, Hareini Nazir Malo Hakupa, and in response to our questions would have said, Stam Nadarti, Rebbe would say, well, buddy, you're going to have to accept one long Nazirus till the end of your life. Let's continue in our Mishnah. Hareini Nazir Mikan Ad Mokum Ploni. This is an expression that we've seen. We saw this in our previous year, this quote. Omdim Kamiyom Mikan Ad Mokum Ploni. We evaluate. Im Pochos Mishloshim Yom, if the journey is less than 30 days, Nazir Shloshim Yom. So then he is accepting upon himself a Nazirus of 30 days. V'im Lav, if the journey is not less than 30 days, it's more than 30 days, Nazir Keminyan Hayomim, he will observe Nazirus according to the length of the journey, according to the number of days of the journey. So that if it's a 42-day journey, he's in effect will observe 42 days of Nazirus. Hareini Nazir Keminyan Yemois Hachamo. A person says, I'll be a Nazir like the days, literally the days of the sun, but Yemos Hachamo is associated with a solar year. Mone Naziros Keminyan Yemois Hachamo. According to Tosfos, the explanation here is he'll count 365 months or 30-day units. 365 30-day units, and take haircuts each 30 days and bring the required sacrifices. If you calculate 365 30-month periods, you're talking about approximately 30 years of Nazirus. Omar Rebbe Yehuda. The Meforshim explained that Rebbe Yehuda's appearance in the Mishnah is to support the Tanakama, to support that which we just said. Maisehoya Kevon Shehishlim Meis. There was an incident where someone had said, I'll be a Nazir Keminya Maisachama. He observed basically 30 years of Nazirus with a haircut every 30 days during that 30-year period. And upon completing his last unit of Nazirus, he passed away. The Gemara. Now, before we continue with the Gemara itself, we take a note of the topic heading on the side, the Nosei. Mishnosenu Kava, the Mishanoizu Nazirus Kamalo Akupa. Our Mishnah established that one who accepts Nazirus like a box full, Royan es Hakupa Keilu Maloi Hardal. We view the box as if it's full of that very fine substance. In other words, a substance that on a unit level will amount to a very large number. Vave Nazir Kol Yomov, and the result of viewing the box as being full of hardal, he's going to end up having to observe Nazirus for the rest of his life. Kami Shenemar Kach. As if he said that. V'loi royin es hakupa kilu malo kishuim v'yelo takona. And we're saying hardal in contrast to viewing the box as being filled with kishuim. Kishuim is a type of vegetation that is large, so that if the one box that might hold 150,000 grains of hardal, that same box might hold 5 kishuim. Well, if you're going to view the box in kishuim terms, so then he would be obligated to observe 5 Nazirus periods. We don't say that, though. We're taking the extreme stringent position by viewing the box as being filled with hardal. So now the Gemara. Royen es hakupa kilu malea chardol v'nazir kol yomov. This, of course, is a quote from the Mishnah. That's why we have little arrows. You can see where this is taken from. The Gemara asks, why does the Mishnah take this approach? V'lechse ki'ilu maleo kishuim v'diluin v'teve le takanta. Why not view that very box as if it's filled with kishuim or diluim? Do another type of large vegetation, and he'll have takanta. He'll be able to achieve release from the Nazirus. He'll be able to eventually drink wine and be free of the Nazirus restrictions. Yet our Mishnah doesn't say that. In order to explain the position of our Mishnah, we have a couple of opinions. And in the Gemara text you can see the triangle used, and on the side under the Mivneh heading we wrote Shnei Deus Kemi Lahamid HaMishnah. We have two approaches explaining who is the author behind our Mishnah. The Gemara, Omar Chizkiya, B'machloikes Shnuya. The issue of how to view the box is in fact a Tanaic controversy. V'Rebbi Shimon hi, the Omar, Odom Machnis es Atzmoi L'Dovar, Shesfekoi Chomer Mivadai. Our Mishnah reflects the opinion of Reb Shimon. That says when a person speaks, he will enter a realm or a conclusion where the doubt, namely he'll be bound by the doubt, which is more stringent than certainty. Let us take a quick look at Rashi. Rav Shimon hi, di Omar Odom machnis atzmoi l'dover shesfekei chomer mivadai. What do we mean by that a person will enter a realm of doubt which is more severe than certainty? And here Rashi explains, the ilu Nazir vadai, a certain Nazir megalech umevi korban v'nechal. A person will be able to take a haircut, he brings a sacrifice, and the sacrifice is eaten. V'ilu al sfeiko lo motzi legaleach. However, when you deal with a suffix, in the case of the doubt, maybe it's a very long Nazirus, he won't be able to take a haircut. Thusly it's explained in that particular tractate. So now we go back to the Gemara. We continue with the, we'll say, source material for Shitas Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon indicates that a person, when he speaks and enters, we'll say, a realm where there may be a doubt, the person will have to take into consideration the doubt and be bound by that, even though its result is more severe, more stringent than that which would have been stated with certainty. Desanya, and here we have the following Tanaic source: Hareini Nazir Almanashe Bekri Ze Meakur. Person accepts Nazirus conditionally, that there is in a particular kri, a pile of grain, a measure of 100 kur being a dry measure. V'holach u'motzoi shenigna v'ishovad. The speaker goes and notices that he discovers that the pile of grain has either been stolen or lost. Now, impossible to determine how much grain there was at the time he vowed. Rabbi Shimon Ozer, shesofek nazirus lahachmir. Rabbi Shimon says that this person will have to observe nazirus because of a position that he takes, that when there's a matter of doubt concerning nazirus, you have to be stringent. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda matir shesofek nazirus lahakel. Rabbi Yehuda allows, meaning he doesn't have to observe nazirus, because when there's an element of doubt, one follows the path of leniency. Before going further, let's glance at Rashi. Across from here, Hareini Nazir Reb Shimon Oser shechayev b'nazirus. He has to observe nazirus hoyil tahave safek, since there is now a doubt. Ihava be'mea kur. If there's a doubt whether there was 100 kur, amrinon tahave be vadai mea kur v'leve nazir, and he has to observe nazirus. In other words, we say that there was certainly 100 kor there, even though we don't really know. We say there certainly was, and he has to be a Nazir. Shekol safek nazirus lahachmir. Any matter of doubt concerning nazirus, you have to rule stringently. Desfekoi benazir chomer mivado. A doubt concerning nazirus is more stringent than a certain situation, a situation of certainty. Dilu vadai shelo hoyu bo mea kor. Had you been certain that there was not 100 kor, lo havi nazir, he wouldn't have been a nazir. That was his condition. He says, I'll be a nazir if there's 100 kor. If there was certainly not 100 kor, he wouldn't be a nazir. Hashadavi safek, now that there is a doubt, amrinon nazir, we say that he is a nazir. Hachi nami b'masnisin, so too in our Mishnah. Hayo desfekahu, since we have a suffix regarding the fellow who said it'll be a nazir like a box full. We don't know whether his intention was a box full of kishuim, the large type of vegetation, or chardal. We apply to him this principle that where there is a doubt concerning nazirus, we rule stringently. And we thereby rule that it's viewed as a box full of chardal and he has no release from the nazirus. According to the opinion, and we saw Rabbi Yehuda, that says where there's a matter of doubt concerning the nazirus, you rule leniently. According to him, we would view the box as being filled with the large type vegetation, namely a situation where there is an end in sight. Let's turn back to the Gemara, the next triangle, Rabbi Yochanan Omar Afilu Teimo Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah, which views the fellow who accepted nazirus in box terms, and we in the Mishnah saw it's viewed as a box full of chardal with the stringent conclusion, that can in fact be understood in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda as well. But did we not see that Rabbi Yehuda ruled quite leniently? There's a difference between our Mishnah and the case Rabbi Yehuda addressed. Hassam, where Rabbi Yehuda appeared lenient, lo nochis le lenazirus. The speaker there didn't enter with any certainty. He didn't enter nazirus at the outset with any certainty. There was no certain nazirus from the very outset. There was a doubt from the very outset. Maybe in that pile there wasn't 100 kor. So we don't, in a case where a person didn't even enter nazirus with certainty, so there is room to be lenient. In our Mishnah, though, nochis leid nazirus, he entered nazirus. Whether the box is filled with something large or filled with something very, very minute, there is a nazirus. The only question is how many nazirus periods. So in our Mishnah, the fellow entered nazirus. How are we going to get him out of it? So that, in other words, once you entered the realm of certain nazirus, and then there's and all that remains as a matter of doubt is the amount, we say, well, how can we get him out of it now? The Gemara asks, what do you mean, how can we get him out of it? Amai lo. Why not? Lechse lekupa ki'ilu malea kishuim v'diluim v'teheve le takanta. View the box as if it's filled with these large types of vegetations and thereby provide for him release. The Gemara responds, Lo salkadaitach nazirus hudekavlole. You cannot think that, you cannot say regarding Rebbe Yehuda that you're dealing with a fellow who accepts multiple nazirios, and therefore we can then deliberate how many multiple nazirus. That's not the case. Why not? The Gemara continues at the top of Amud Beis. The Rebbe Yehuda Savalo Rebbe. Rebbe Yehuda holds like Rebbe. And this is now a reflection back on that which we learned at the beginning of today's shiur, the top mission of Ches Amud Aleph, where Disnan, Rebbe Omer, regarding someone who had said, Hareini Nazir Kesei Roshi, Rebbe said, Ein ze megalech achas l'shloshim yom. He does not take a haircut at 30-day intervals. Rather, it's one long Nazirus till the end of his life. According to Rebbe, when would we say that the example of Seir Roshi could afford him haircuts at 30-day intervals? That's when he used this added expression, or more elaborate expression, of Harei Olai Nazirus. But if someone said Hareini Nazir, there we saw Kisei Roshi, or in our example of Hareini Nazir Malo Hakupa, there Rebbe Yehuda will agree with Rebbe that he is accepting upon himself one long Nazirus. So then there's no room to deliberate whether it's a box full of this or a box full of that. He certainly got into Nazirus, and once you get into the Nazirus, and Rebbe Yehuda is described as holding like Rebbe, there's no solution. There's no way out, because it's one long Nazirus. Note that as we continue in the Gemara, we have a long question marking. In effect, there are two questions that are contained, but it's answered. The questions are answered only after the long question itself. On the side of the Gemara, we have a nosei mivneh heading. We combine the topic heading with a structural note. A trapezoid form appears, or a volcano shape. These are kushios al nisyonis Rabbi Yochanan. These are questions on Rabbi Yochanan's attempt lahamid mishnaseinu Rabbi Yehuda, to set up our Mishnah in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda. Al smach shesoiver kerebbi, on the basis of Rabbi Yehuda holding like Rebbe. So that you'll see in the volcano shapes, each time the Gemara is going to be asking regarding Rabbi Yehuda, mi sover lo kerebbi. Does Rabbi Yehuda really adopt Rebbe's approach to this analysis? The Gemara, maybe just to review the main point right now, is that we saw our Mishnah with a stringent ruling, viewing the box as if it's full of charo, resulting in a lifetime of Nazirus. We saw, on the other hand, Rebbe Yehuda saying Sofek Nazirus Lahakel in the case of a person who made his Nazirus conditional on a certain amount of grain in a pile. And Rabbi Yochanan's approach is to say that our Mishnah, with its stringent approach, can conform to Rabbi Yehuda as well. Rabbi Yehuda's leniency was stated there only because he didn't descend into definite Nazirus from the outset. But once you descend into definite Nazirus, you are bound. And as far as a suggestion to nevertheless look at the box as if it's filled with large vegetation, that was rejected by saying that Rebbe Yehuda holds like Rebbe. That when one says Hareini Nazir, as opposed to saying Harei Olai Nazirus, by saying Hareini Nazir and then adding whatever qualification you add, you're in effect accepting upon yourself one long Nazirus period. Now the Gemara asks, "For Rebbe Yehuda misavar lo kerebbi, does Rebbe Yehuda really hold like Rebbe? V'ha'tnan Hareini Nazir keminyan yemois hachama v'chulei." And this, of course, you can see, is a quote that we had from our Mishnah, the last diamond on Daf Ches Amud Aleph, we saw this quote. That's why here the Gemara is presenting it in a terse fashion. And Om Rabbi Yehuda Maise Hoya V'Kevon Shehishlim Meis. Person accepted upon himself to be a Nazir, and he said Hareini Nazir. That very expression that we saw Rebbe take issue with, saying that would lead to one long Nazirus. Well, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? He comments in support of the Tana Kama that a person will have to observe, in effect, 30 years of Nazirus, and at 30-day intervals, he will be able to take a haircut, and at the end of those 30 years, he has completed his Nazirus obligation. The Rashi, and here we should take note of the Rashi. There are two Lishonos in the Rashi. So we're looking at what's called the Lishna Achrina. It's marked off very clearly in your mark Gemara. To the end of the narrow lines, there's a Lishna Achrina. V'hat Tanya Hareini Nazir Keminyan Yemos Hachamo Klomar Kolzman Shachamo Zoyrachas Dahainu At Soif Hoilam. One could have interpreted that expression of I'm a Nazir as long as the sun shines. Well, as long as the sun shines, that could be till the end of time. And yet, the Mishnah said, namely Rebbe Yehuda said, he has to observe, in effect, 30 years of Nazirus. So now, the Gemara. If you say that Rebbe Yehuda is of an opinion different than that of Rebbe, namely, that he has accepted upon himself multiple Naziruyos, 30 years of Nazirus periods, 30-day intervals, or if you using the expression of the Mishnah, 365 Nazir months. So, Hainu Taimo, then with that we understand Rabbi Yehuda's expression, the Kevon the Hishlim Meis. Since he has completed it, he's completed his Nazirus observance of 30 years of, we'll say 365 Nazirus periods, he completed his obligation, and then he died. All of that fits in well to the scheme of things if you say that the expression of Hareini Nazir Keminyan Yemoisachamo is an acceptance of multiple Nazirios, which is not the approach that Rebbe would have taken. Eloi Amris Chada Nazirus Kibulalei. But if you say like Rebbe, that a person who says Hareini Nazir Keminyan Yemoisachamo is in effect accepting one long Nazirus period, and we saw in Rashi what that would have meant. As long as the sun shines. Well, mihave hashloma klal, would there be any completion to that? Would there be any end to that? So, Rebbe Yehuda does not seem to accept Rebbe's approach. V'yoid misavalo keRebbe. Again we ask, does Rebbe Yehuda hold like Rebbe? V'ha Tanya, Rebbe Yehuda oimer. Again, we're featuring Rebbe Yehuda. Hareini Nazir, Minyan Ilkati Kayetsu Minyan Shibale Shmita. Another Girsa has Shivile Shmita. Rebbe Yehuda, again, note the expression that the fellow uses. He says Hareini Nazir. That is the expression that Rebbe says is the acceptance of one long Nazirus. And yet, what does Rebbe Yehuda say about that? A person who says Hareini Nazir, Minyan Hilkati Kayetsu. Hilkati is a reference to dried figs. The number of dried figs that are lying in the field, or shibale shmita, sheaves of grain left over from before the Shemitah year. Another girsa is paths that are formed by people cutting through fields during the Shemitah when nothing is growing in the fields, and hence traversing through the fields doesn't injure any crop development. So one who accepted Nazirus in that fashion, Moine Naziros Kaminyan hilkati kayetz ukaminyan shibale shmita. All he has to do is he counts. He observes Nazirus periods in accordance to the number of dried figs that are there, or piles of figs that are there, or the number of Shemitah paths that were formed in the field during the Shemitah year. What do we see from here, though? We see that he's counting multiple Nazirios. If we look in the Tosfos, middle of the Tosfos column, Moina Naziros Minyan Hilkati Kayetz Alma, we see from here Naziros Harbe Kabul Leila Rav Yehuda. He has accepted upon himself multiple Nazirios. Again, that's not in conformity to Rebbe. Well, with this having been said, so now we're weakening the approach taken by Rabbi Yochanan on Omer Aleph. The Gemara responds, minyan shiny. In both of these examples, use the arrows that we have to the immediate right-hand side of the Gemara. Just navigating upwards, you'll notice that on each of the lines above, the person speaking and accepting his nearest mentioned minyan, number of. He said in the previous case, Hareini Nazir minyan hilkati. In the case before that, Hareini Nazir keminyan yemoy sachamo. The use of the word minyan, the number of, is different. And as a result, Rebbe Yehuda, if you're dealing with a fellow who says Hareini Nazir malo kupo, he doesn't use the word minyan. In such a case, Rebbe Yehuda does hold like Rebbe, where you use the word minyan, so things are different. And the assumption right now is things are different, meaning that even Rebbe would agree that when you use the word minyan, you're accepting multiple naziros. Minyan meaning number of. That suggests the idea of unitized nazirios, individual, multiple naziros periods. The Gemara asks, Umi shani leila Rebbe minyan? Here the question is focused on Rebbe, which up till this point we're saying that Rebbe Yehuda learns like Rebbe, that Rebbe Yehuda accepts Rebbe's approach to this topic. And if that's the case, well, whatever Rebbe Yehuda said, we're assuming that's what Rebbe would hold. And if Rebbe Yehuda is explained as holding minyan shiny, so then ostensibly Rebbe would have said the same thing. But is that really so? Does Rebbe make a distinction just because you added the word minyan? V'ha Tanya, we have the following source in which Rebbe will appear in the latter part of this source. V'ha Tanya Hareini Nazir keminyan yemoy sachamo. Moina Nazirus keminyan yemoy sachamo. Person says, I'm going to be a Nazir like in accordance with the number of the days of the sun. So he counts 365 Nazirus periods, or if he says Kimei Halavona, Moina Kimei Halavona, the number of days of the moon has a cycle of 30 days approximately, so he will observe 30 Nazirus periods. Rebbe Omer Ad Shiyoymar, this idea of individual Nazirus periods is not true unless he says Ad Shiyoymar Naziros Olai Kaminyan Yemoy Sachamu Kaminyan Yemoy Salvona. So once again, the mere fact that the word minyan appears is not enough for Rebbe to accept the idea of individualized multiple Nazirus periods. You have to use the specific expression of Nazirus Olai, or maybe Naziros Olai. So what are we to say regarding Shitas Rebbe Yehuda right now? The Gemara says as follows: Rebbe Yehuda savar lo kavosei bechada upolig olei bechada. In order to bolster Rabbi Yochanan from Omid Aleph, who said that our Mishnah with Malo Kupa being viewed as Malo Hardal is in effect in accordance with Rebbe Yehuda as well, we have to say as follows: Rebbe Yehuda holds like Rebbe with regard to one aspect of this topic and disagrees on another aspect. And the Gemara spells it out. Soverlo kavase b'chado, chado nazirus kabale. He holds like Rebbe that where you said Hareini Nazir and whatever follows doesn't really matter, but you say Hareini Nazir, for example, Kamalo Kupa, Rebbe Yehuda holds like Rebbe, one long Nazirus. And as we explained, once you descended into you definitely descended into a Nazirus situation, we can't get you out of it, and we have to view the box as if it's full of Hardo. So with regard to the expression of Hareini Nazir, Rebbe Yehuda agrees with Rebbe that you're dealing with one long, uninterrupted, non-interval Nazirus period. Upolagale b'chada, Rebbe Yehuda will disagree with Rebbe on one point. Rebbe Yehuda shonile moine. Rebbe Yehuda places an emphasis. Shonile means it makes a difference to him. The mere appearance of the word minyan. Mone means counting or number of. Regardless of whether you said Hareini Nazir or Harei Olai Naziros, that doesn't matter to Rebbe Yehuda. The fact that the word minyan appears, that is enough to create this sense of Naziriteship with intervals. It might be a very long period, but there are intervals. And as such, we can speak about the completion thereof, once you observed all the intervals. For Rebbe, lo shani leimona. But according to Rebbe, the fact that the word minyan alone appears in his statement, in his acceptance of Nazirus, that doesn't make a difference. That's not enough to make a difference. So at this point in the Gemara, where we've concluded the sugya, we can say that Rabbi Yochanan's approach to our Mishnah as opposed to Chizkiah said that our Mishnah is really a machlokes tanoim and it would conform to Reb Shimon alone. As far as Rabbi Yochanan is concerned, not so, but rather it can be learned in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda as well. Before continuing in the Gemara, we glance at the side. We have a Nosei Mivneh heading. The house form is featured, and you'll see in the Gemara itself a number of these house forms. Braisos, Tanaic sources, and Mavios Dugmos Shones Shel Kabbalas Nazirus, in which different examples of Nazirus acceptance will be featured. You'll have Memushachos, long Nazirus periods, and Merubos, multiple Nazirus periods. The Gemara. Tonu Rabbanan. Hareini Nazir kol yemei chayai. Hareini Nazir oilam. What is the result of these vows? Harei ze Nazir olam. He is viewed as a Nazir olam, and in the past we've seen that saying that someone is a Nazir olam, it would mean that he would have the right to take haircuts at different intervals. Exactly what those intervals are, there happen to be three different opinions we saw in Tanoim. Nevertheless, but haircuts at intervals is a possibility. Now, here we have another Nazirus expression. Afilu mea shana. Afilu elav shanim. He says, I'm going to be a Nazir even 100 years, or even 1,000 years. Ein ze Nazir oilam, ela Nazir li oilam. He's not categorized as a Nazir olam, but rather as a Nazir olam, the difference being that in these cases, he used a fixed amount of time, and as we learned earlier, that when you do that, you are accepting one long Nazirus period without any interval haircut possibilities. There's a Rashi that was the basis for our explanation. You can see this in the lower part of the page, in the extreme long lines, the middle of that section. Afilu mea shana ein ze nazir olam elo ze nazir li olam dechad nazirus arichta u dahavya. As Rashi says, it's one long Nazirus. Mishum de'is le kitzutza kramrin leo, because there is a fixed amount of time in his statement, as we had said earlier. We continue in the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanan. Hareini Nazir v'achas. The result, moine shtayim. V'oid. If he says Hareini Nazir v'achas v'od, Mone Sholosh, then he has to observe 3 Nazirus periods. Vishuv, if he says Hareini Nazir v'achas v'oid vishuv, Moine Arba, he observes 4 Nazirus periods. What you're seeing here is that every additional expression obligates him to an additional Nazirus period. The Gemara asks, Pshita, is that not obvious that if he says Vishuv, he's obligating himself to 1 more Nazirus period? Why does it have to be stated? Mahu detema, without that example being stated in this Tanaic source, I would have thought Vishuv equals Ki Kulhu. In other words, the person had said Hareini Nazir v'achas v'od. At that point we know he's accepted 3 Nazirus periods. Without the source, I would have thought that if he adds the word Vishuv, he's doubling whatever he had said till that point. So if up till that point he had accepted 3 Nazirus periods, and then he adds the word Vishuv, so it's another 3. V'havya le shis, and the total then would be 6 Nazirus periods. Chomash Malon Delo, this Tanaic source reveals to us that that's not so, but rather, by adding the word Vishuv, you're simply adding 1 additional Nazirus period. Tana Rabbanan, Hareini Nazir. Sumlus Omer, Hein equals Achas. If a person would say, Hareini Nazir Hein, the word Hein is a Greek word meaning 1. We have other languages that have words similar to that, like the word uno, or the word 1 itself. Looking at it in a, let's say, a literal fashion, maybe we should say in a transliterated fashion, 1, Hein, very similar sound, it means 1. If a person would say, for example, Hareini Nazir Digun, that's Shtayim, that's 2. That means he's accepting 2 Nazirus periods. If he would say Trigun, Shalosh, 3 Nazirus periods. If he would say Tetragon, that would be 4 Nazirus periods. And here's a word that is probably familiar to many of those listening to this year, Pentagon, Chamesh. That results in 5 Nazirus periods. The Meforshim say that the Chidush of this source is that Nazirus acceptance can be done in any language. And by the way, that point is found in the Rashi, where he says 5 lines from the very end, at the end of the line, Vashminin de b'chol loshon yochol odom lekabel olav Nazirus. Tona Rabbanan. And here, since we mentioned these Greek words, the Gemara ends off the parak with basically an unrelated topic, but the point, or the common denominator between this additional point and that which we just said, has to do with these Greek number references. The source deals with laws that pertain to a house that became afflicted with negoyim. Negoyim being a type of discoloration discovered on the walls of a house, and at the time of the Torah, and for many generations henceforth, these laws were observed on a practical level, if you will. Today we don't run into these things. As far as technical halacha is concerned, these are halachas that still they technically apply, but we have basically either the phenomenon of negoyim doesn't appear, or even if it appears, we've simply lost the tradition on it. Nevertheless, the following is stated: Bias Tana Rabbanan bias agel digun tregun pentagon, a house that is either round or has 2 corners to it, or trigon, it's a 3-corner triangular structured house. Pentagon, a pentagon. Do we have to say any more than that? For those who might not be familiar, a 5-cornered house, Eino Metame B'Negoyim. It does not become afflicted in halachic terms with Negoyim. In other words, even if there's some type of wall discoloration as is described in the Torah, it's not going to affect in halachic, in tumah terms, a house of these aforementioned number of corners. Tetragon, a four-cornered house, metame benegoyim. That kind of house is subject to tumas negoyim. My taima. What is the basis for this conclusion? The Gemara says it's a scriptural source, and the Gemara here makes a brief reference to two psukim. The psukim themselves, you can see, are quoted in Rashi. So the Gemara reads as follows: Lamato omer kir kiros, lamalo omer kir kiros. You have two psukim referred to regarding nigei botim. Rashi quotes the psukim. You can see 3 lines from the bottom. In posa nega bekiros habayis. The word kiros is stated in the plural. Kir is a wall. Kiros is plural. So minimum plural is 2. Another pasuk, and Rashi quotes it, 2nd line from the bottom. Vinei hanega bekiros habayis. Again, you see the word kiros in the plural form. In both of the psukim, it could have been written as, in the singular, it could have been written, Vinei posa nega bekir habayis, or Vinei anega bekir habayis, and yet the Torah spells it out in a plural form. So this clues us into the following, that instead of the word kir, it says kiros, and that appears twice, and we said the minimum of plural is 2, but it says it twice. That gets you harei kan arba. That leads you to 4 walls. 4 walls will establish 4 corners, and hence only a 4-cornered house is subject to negoyim with all of its legal ramifications. You notice, of course, with good fortune and the help of the one above, we've completed the first parak of Nazir. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.